The first voice that ever tried to divide me from my sister arrived on a wet August afternoon, just as the rain began to drum on the rusted balcony rail outside our apartment. Myra and I were both 17. I was working through a stack of geometry proofs, and she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, painting a thin line of silver above one eyelid with the concentration of a surgeon. Then the same sentence bloomed in both our heads, cold and bright as a blade, compatible hosts located, competitive ascent protocol initiated. Only one sister may reach the crowned ending. Myra looked up at me. I looked at her. For one long second, the room seemed to wait for us to become enemies. Instead, we burst out laughing so hard I knocked my pencil cup onto the floor. The thing called itself the Meridian System. It spoke with the smug patience of someone used to being obeyed. It offered us points in exchange for tasks, and it explained those points could be converted into beauty, memory, reflexes, intuition, charm, discipline, even luck. Mira touched her own cheek, fascinated and suspicious. At once, I asked whether the system had a manual, a source code, or a known failure.
Right.
It ignored my question. We were supposed to fight over limited rewards.
We did. The opposite.
Mira put her early points into posture, stage presence, voice control, and the sort of beauty that made strangers turn their heads before they knew why. I poured mine into pattern recognition, working memory, inference speed, and the kind of relentless concentration that could make the world fall silent around a difficult
theorem.
The system adapted quickly and tried to make us jealous. It told me Mira's face would open doors that intellect never could. It told Mira that no one would remember. A pretty girl, once the next pretty girl arrived, while a brilliant woman could command entire rooms. We listened, and then we ate instant noodles from the same bowl and made fun of its dramatic phrasing. That was not unusual for us. Our childhood had trained us to read each other as if we shared a pulse. When I nearly drowned under winter ice at 9, Mira heard the crack from 50 meters away and ran before anyone else understood what had happened when she choked on peach candy. The next summer, I dragged a chair under the kitchen light and performed the clumsy version of first aid I had memorized from a library book. We had already practiced not losing each other long before a machine tried to monetize our loyalties. For almost a year, we managed the Meridian System the way patient gardeners manage a vine that insists on growing through the window frame. We fed it harmless friction. If it wanted rivalry, we staged rivalry. Myra would say my sweaters looked like they had been selected by a grieving librarian, and I would reply that her shoes had the structural integrity of decorative desserts. The system purred whenever either of us won a point. It never realized the points were being spent according to joint planning. Then, during our final year of secondary school, it changed tactics. Special convergence mission, it announced. Priority target, Cassian Rourke. Male. Her. High value bond. First successful seduction receives a vast reward and 10 permanent attribute points siphoned from the competing sister. It said, siphoned as, if that word would make our blood sing. I remember lowering my physics notes and saying, absolutely not. Myra was even less diplomatic. She asked whether the system had developed brain rot. Then she declined the mission too. The Meridian System nearly short-circuited itself. With outrage, Cassian Rourke, it insisted, was a golden boy in human form, handsome, rich, well-connected, the only son of the Rourke media empire, a boy for whom doors opened before he knocked. It promised that whichever of us won him would never have to worry about money again. I told it that scholarships were less noisy. Myra said she disliked being treated like the second half of an acquisition strategy. The system roared that girls dreamed of opportunities like this. That was when I understood something useful. It did not know us at all. It did not even know enough about female desire to lie convincingly. It knew scripts. It knew cliches. It knew consumption. It mistook those things for the human heart. Cassian noticed Mira before the system found a way to notice him.
That detail
mattered to me later. He first appeared in our corridor with 3 boys orbiting him, and a smile that had probably broken more than one sensible rule. He was one of those boys built by expensive schools and lifelong certainty. Broad shoulders, easy posture, precise haircut, the careless confidence of someone who had never once mistaken survival for victory. People liked him because he looked as if sunlight preferred him. Myra walked past him without slowing down. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, he overheard her telling a classmate that if she ever dated anyone, she would prefer a boy smarter than herself because beauty was useless. During arguments, he turned toward her as if she had personally slapped him awake. She did not even notice. He noticed enough for both of them. I did. And because I noticed, I sat Mira down at our kitchen table and explained why. Boys like Cassian made terrible experiments. Wealth, I told her, often insulated a person from the consequences required to form character. Early charm was not the same as maturity. Progress under pressure was not the same as discipline. A boy who discovered ambition only after his pride was injured should be observed from a safe
distance, like unstable chemistry.
Myra listened with her chin propped on one hand and said very seriously that I had just made courtship sound like a laboratory. Fire? It is, I replied. If you are not careful, She laughed, then grew thoughtful.
No, she said.
He looks like the sort of person who has never had to ask whether anyone else can afford the cost of his impulses. That answer should have reassured me. Instead, it sharpened my concern. Myra usually saw people clearly. The system?
Hated that.
Its first real punishment came on a night when I refused the seduction mission for the 5th and final time. A wire of pain shot through my skull so suddenly I dropped the glass I was carrying. It was not ordinary pain. It had pattern, rhythm, intentional spacing like a signal written in electricity. Mira grabbed my shoulders. Before I hit the floor, the Meridian system said with terrible calm, non-compliant, hosts require corrective friction. Even in that moment I was thinking, pain could be generated. Stimulus could be mapped. If it could stimulate the brain, then it had architecture. If it had architecture, it had limits. The thought steadied me enough to breathe. Later, after the pain passed, I wrote 7 pages of notes by hand. Timing, intensity, emotional disruption, residual effects, memory distortion, language patterns. Myra pressed an ice pack to the back of my neck and told me only I would treat being electrocuted as valuable data. She was right. Cassian's next move was public spectacle, which should have warned the whole school what kind of affection he meant to offer. During Winter Festival week, he rented the screen of the office tower across from our campus and plastered it with Mira's photograph without her consent. Beneath it, in letters 3 stories high, he wrote, Mira Quill, I like you. People should know. Students screamed, filmed it, applauded. It envied it. Boys called it romantic because they imagined themselves in his place, not hers. Myra went pale as paper. Her hand in mine was so cold it felt
feverish,
she whispered. I feel like I'm being hunted in a lit room.
So I did what?
The crowd considered unthinkable. I called the police, then I called the building
manager.
Then I called Cassian's homeroom teacher. Then, because humiliation educates certain boys better than sermons, I insisted his written apology be displayed on that same tower for 3 consecutive days. He glared at me while the school administration finalized the terms. He looked less like a golden boy then and more like a child who had discovered that money could buy a stage but not immunity. He asked why I hated him when he had done something grand. For my sister, I answered because a gift given without consent is just pressure. Wearing flowers, Myra stood beside me and shook with anger she could barely shape. Into language, Cassian apologized publicly. His face hung over the avenue with a caption about respect, privacy, and unlawful use of another person's image. Everyone laughed at him. For the first time, he learned that public attention was not a pet, that only bit strangers. The Meridian system punished me again that night, harder than before. While I lay in the dark, counting heartbeats through the static pain, Myra curled beside me and whispered that if we had to burn, we would burn on our own terms. We graduated into separate orbits. Myra entered a conservatory program attached to a major university and treated beauty not as destiny but as craft. She studied movement, diction, camera angles, breathing patterns, period posture, stage combat, and the exhausting science of making emotion legible without making it cheap. When people praised only her face, she smiled and went back to vocal drills until midnight. I went where equations were still allowed to be beautiful in public. Mathematics led me to computational physics, and computational physics led me to signal theory, and signal theory became the place where my brain felt most usefully alive. The Meridian system sulked through all of it. It wanted catfights, tears, dress fittings, stolen kisses in stairwells. Instead, it got grant applications, rehearsals, research papers, and sisters who compared time management strategies over dumplings. If it had possessed a body, I think it would have strangled us both. By then, Myra's rise happened fast enough to frighten me. One independent film led to a supporting role. One supporting role led to a streaming drama that suddenly made her face impossible to avoid. She was luminous on screen, but what made the camera love her was not only beauty, it was nerve. Myra could stand perfectly still while a scene collapsed around her and make stillness feel like a blade. Critics called her effortless. I called it 2 in the morning to remind her that invisible labor was still labor even when fools romanticized it. She laughed, but she was tired in the way performers get tired when they are simultaneously becoming a symbol and being
eaten by one.
Cassian resurfaced during that period with sharpened manners and a new talent for strategic patience. He stopped grand gestures. He learned to appear helpful. That, somehow, was more dangerous. Around then, I received the offer that would pull me out of reach. My doctoral work on hostile signal interference had drawn the attention of a government laboratory, whose existence was described to me with more omissions than facts. They wanted young people with narrow obsessions and strong tolerances for isolation. They wanted researchers who could model intrusions into cognition under extreme conditions. They wanted, though they did not say it plainly, minds able to recognize the difference between communication and occupation. I thought immediately of the Meridian system. I thought of the patterned electric pain, of the command structures of language, shaped like a funnel. I also thought of Mira, who by then was balancing scripts, training, publicity, and the daily nuisance of being seen too much by strangers and not enough by the people who claimed to love her. We sat on our apartment floor that night with our knees touching and discussed risk like adults pretending not to be afraid. In the end, we chose distance because we had always chosen the future over comfort. When forced, I left with 1 suitcase, 3 encrypted notebooks, and a promise from Myra that she would message Owen if Cassian ever crossed a line I would consider litigable, immoral, or stupid. She made me promise something too, that if I found a way to understand the system, I would not keep the knowledge to myself out of pride. It was an unkindly accurate concern. I can go alone for a very long time once I think I have a solvable problem. On the morning I flew out, Mira came to the station in dark glasses and a cap pulled low because 2 magazines had recently started. Following her face, she hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. Go make something terrible.
Very useful, she said.
Go become so brilliant that when you return, even fate has to show identification at the door. The desert site where I spent the next 4 years taught me 2 things with equal brutality. The first was that secrecy corrodes time until months pass like swallowed pins. The second was that minds can be influenced by signals far subtler than anyone outside the field likes to believe. We were designing protective lattices for pilots, deep-sea operators, and remote analysts who worked around adversarial noise. But every experiment I ran had a second shadow layer I did not admit to.
My supervisors.
I was also mapping the Meridian system by memory. The rhythm of its punishments, the cadence of its prompts, the way it insinuated value through false
Scarcity.
the way it framed women as positional goods inside male-centered stories. I wrote private simulations after hours. I built theoretical cages. I hid them inside legitimate models. Whenever I could send Mira a message through the approved channels, I kept them short, bright, and ordinary. Systems like ours love ordinary because it leaves fewer fingerprints. The scandal broke while I was still beyond reach. It began with a luxury charity broadcast hosted from a private club in which Celine, smiling with the composure of someone who knew the room already belonged to her, walked into a dressing suite and found Mira half changed for an appearance segment. The live feed caught 3 terrible seconds. Fabric in Mira's hands, Celine's hard voice, staff screaming for the camera to cut, then the stream vanished. That was enough. By sunrise, edited clips were everywhere. Mira was branded a homewrecker, a kept woman, a schemer who had climbed through beauty and spread her legs across the wrong ladder. Cassian posted a single sentence, "Do not attach me to strangers." It was such an obscene lie that I have often wished language could physically recoil. But lies travel well when rich families pave the road. When I was finally released from the project, the first thing I saw outside the transit hub was Mira's face being peeled off a billboard by workers in gray harnesses. They were efficient, almost gentle, as if dismantling someone's reputation required professional tenderness. I stood there with my bag at my feet and watched her eyes vanish behind the curl of vinyl. My phone, newly returned to me after years of sealed networks, filled with delayed welcome messages and then with news summaries I had not asked for. Articles, threads,
Commentary?
character, analyses written by people who had never met her,
Slurs.
moral lectures, amateur, body language experts, professional cowards. By the time I reached the car, Owen Hart, the attorney who had taken us in after our parents died, had sent, I had already read enough to understand 2 facts. Myra was being sacrificed in public, and somebody had spent serious money ensuring there would be no clean evidence left
Behind.
I found her in the apartment we had once celebrated moving into, sitting on the floor beside the sofa with both curtains drawn despite the late afternoon light.
No.
Makeup, hair tied badly, 2 glasses on the coffee table, 1 untouched. For a second, she only stared at me as if my return were another cruelty arranged by the universe. Then her face broke. She came to me so fast she almost slipped on the rug. I held her while she shook. I had imagined anger on the journey back, clean and useful. What I actually felt was older and more savage. Someone had taught my sister to doubt the evidence of her own life. Someone had cornered her inside a story she had never agreed to audition for. When she finally managed to speak, her first sentence was not about Cassian, the scandal, or the money. It was, "I am so tired of being explained by strangers." The Meridian system returned that night with the oily satisfaction of a creditor inspecting a debtor's empty kitchen. "See," it said, "this is what comes of resisting your design." The brilliant sister buries herself in work and leaves the beautiful
One undefended.
The beautiful sister thinks independence can outshout desire. Both of you forget that stories close around women whether they consent or not. It wanted us to beg. It wanted Mira desperate enough to crawl back to Cassian and me furious enough to become the jealous, unlovable genius who would do anything to destroy her.
Zister's romance.
That was the role it had always saved for me. Instead, I asked it a question. "If you're so certain of the ending, why are you still here?" It went silent for a full second. Systems do not like being noticed at the point where confidence becomes maintenance. That second told me it was already working harder than it wanted us to know. Mira told me everything in layers because trauma rarely comes out in sequence. Cassian had become softer, then indispensable, then impossible to disentangle from certain production decisions. He never quite demanded exclusivity, but he behaved as though her time were a thing he had a prior claim to. When she resisted, he presented patience as proof of love. When she yielded small things, he called them
Trust.
the ambush stream had not been spontaneous. A manager placed by Rourke. Interests had altered schedules, rerouted staff, and made sure Mira would be in that dressing suite at the exact moment Celine's team arrived. Her devices had been handled afterward. Backups disappeared. Message histories thinned. Even the secure folder where Mira kept ugly screenshots had been remotely wiped. Owen had tried to help, but every avenue he opened seemed already blocked by some partnership. Some donor, some older handshake. He was not compromised by malice. He was simply outranked by a world that bills coercion as logistics. I spent 2 days in Mira's guest room, surrounded by notebooks, disassembled, wearables, and a headache born of rage. The protective lattice from the desert. Project had been designed to identify and buffer hostile external stimuli before they could entrain cognitive response patterns. In simpler language, it taught the brain to refuse rhythms it had not chosen. The meridian system was not exactly a signal in any laboratory sense, but it behaved like one when it punished us or pushed desire through narrative incentives. It needed interface points, reward, pain, scarcity, longing, public validation. Those were its cables. If I could not destroy it, perhaps I could force it out into a visible channel where it would have to reveal its operating logic. That was the beginning of the bracelets. Myra called them my revenge bangles. I told her the phrase was unserious. She answered that unseriousness was how sane people kept breathing. To build the trap, I needed 3 components. A resonant loop keyed to both our neurological signatures, a public environment dense enough for the system to overcommit itself, and a triggering event emotionally significant enough to convince it the long-desired collapse was finally at hand. The first part I could manage with old research models and some ethically ambiguous favors from colleagues who thought they were helping me prototype a media interference shield for performers. The second part required spectacle. The third required bait. Mira heard the word bait and immediately guessed what I wanted.
One final appearance, she said.
One stage. One chance for Cassian to think he is winning. I nodded. She closed her eyes. I could see the exhaustion in her, but I could also see the old fire that had once made her perform back-to-back auditions with a fever because she refused to let weak men narrate her limits. If we do this, she said, we finish it.
We do not survive it.
Halfway, we still needed proof strong enough to outlive edited clips. That part came from something the people around Cassian had overlooked because they considered sentimentality a weakness. Myra had not trusted the cloud services managed by her production team after the first-time files disappeared, so she had begun sending selected voice notes and screenshots to an old private address we used in school for exchanging poems, recipes, and gossip about ridiculous teachers. The account had been inactive for years. No one had thought to search it. I logged in using the password to a children's mystery novel we used to fight over. There they were. Cassian begging under our building at midnight to be let upstairs. Cassian calling Myra his real future while insisting the engagement to Celine was temporary. Cassian promising to correct the public record and then delaying. Threads with the manager, calendar manipulations, payment trails. Enough to crack. Not only a scandal, but the careful self-image of a family that believed scandal existed for smaller people. The ugliest discovery was not in Cassian's messages. It was in the system's own pattern. While reviewing everything, I found a correspondence between the dates of our parents' final months, the system's increasing hostility, and the sequence of coincidences that had left 2 girls with no living protectors except one exhausted young lawyer. The Meridian system had once boasted that our tragedy made a suitable hosts. Suitable. The word made my hands shake. It had not directly confessed to arranging the crash that killed our parents, but it had clearly profited from it and perhaps nudged circumstances around it. That possibility sat inside me like broken glass. Myra saw my face when I told her and did not cry. She went very still, which was how she looked when a role, a danger, or a grief passed beyond ordinary language. Then she asked the only question that mattered. If we catch it, can it ever leave anyone else alone? I answered truthfully. I do not know. So we would have to make sure it could not keep choosing. Owen Hart became our ally again in the direct, practical way that first made me trust him. When I laid out the plan, he did not ask whether it was emotionally wise. He asked where he should stand and what legal exposure we faced if wealthy men publicly embarrassed themselves while attempting reputational homicide. There was shame in him too. He knew he had been outmaneuvered by networks he should have anticipated. I told him guilt was only useful if it moved furniture, filed motions, or broke doors. He laughed despite himself. Then he arranged the stage we needed by leveraging the one thing rich families still fear when they are already bleeding. The promise of a controlled narrative. Rourke Media agreed to a live reconciliation interview framed as a dignified resolution between Celine Arden and Mira Quill. Cassian would attend, naturally, because vanity and panic rarely miss their cue. The system thrummed with joy as soon as the broadcast date was fixed. It believed at last that the sisters were walking willingly toward the knife. Myra spent the morning of the interview letting a stylist rebuild the public version of her face while I calibrated the bracelets in a hotel bathroom and checked signal coherence against my own pulse. We looked ridiculous in the mirror together. One woman in a silk robe with half-finished eyeliner, another in rolled-up sleeves, soldering something that looked like elegant jewelry for deeply resentful astronauts. You know, Mira said, most sisters would handle this by buying wine and crying beautifully on a podcast. Most sisters were not raised by grief, performance, notes, and spite, I said. She laughed. Then she grew serious. If this goes wrong and it chooses you, do not bargain. Promise me. I turned from the sink and kissed her forehead. If it chooses me, I drag it to hell by the throat. If it chooses you, I follow. She nodded once. That was enough. We had never needed many words to sign a contract between us. The interview venue was a glass-walled theater owned by one of the Rourke subsidiaries, the sort of place where people believe transparency is achieved by expensive architecture rather than honest conduct. Owen sat 3 rows back beside 2 quiet associates and a woman from an independent ethics commission who thought she had been invited to observe a media harassment case. Good. I like witnesses who do not yet know they are about to become necessary. Cassian arrived in charcoal, tailoring, handsome in the deliberate way men become when entire industries groom them to appear sympathetic in crisis. Celine entered separately, immaculate, every gesture saying she had practiced composure longer than most people had practiced.
Reading.
Myra took her seat beneath the lights with shoulders squared and hands folded to hide the slight tremor in her fingers. I remained off stage for the opening segment, just visible enough in the wings that the system could feel me, not enough that the audience would yet know I mattered. The host began with the usual poison softness.
We are here tonight, she said to
Clear the air around a regrettable misunderstanding that has unfairly harmed several lives. Unfairly harmed several lives is how elegant institutions say public disembowelment when they are afraid of lawsuits. Celine spoke first. She was better than I expected, measured, cool, wounded without becoming shrill. She said she had been hurt by what she had seen and had acted impulsively under emotional strain. Mira was invited to respond. She lowered her eyes and let silence do some of the
work.
The room leaned closer.
It is strange, she said at last, how women are always
asked to explain the room after men have built the trap. Even Cassian looked momentarily thrown by that. Good, I thought. He still believed he understood the script. I needed him relaxed enough to keep improvising his own ruin. Cassian took the bait almost instantly. He leaned forward with the expression men borrow when they wish to appear noble while retaining all available exits. He said he regretted the confusion. He said Mira had become important to him. He said he had tried privately to protect everyone involved. He said Celine deserved respect, Myra deserved peace, and the public deserved clarity. Every sentence was so carefully balanced between responsibility and denial that it would have sounded impressive to anyone not trained in either logic or lying. Myra asked him one question. When did you stop knowing me? He blinked. That was not in the rehearsal
notes.
She asked again softly this time. When did I become someone you could describe according to whichever woman stood nearest the camera? Celine turned her head. The host shifted in her chair. Somewhere above us, hidden in the lighting rig, my small receiver detected the meridian system stirring harder against the bracelets. It smelled climax.
So did I.
That was when I stepped onto the stage. The audience murmured because public controversies adore an additional woman. I had not dressed for charm. I wore black. Clean lines, no shine, no softness. The kind of silhouette that tells expensive men their charisma has no jurisdiction here. Cassian's jaw tightened the moment he saw me. The system flooded my nerves with anticipatory static, delighted. At last,
it
whispered, the bitter sister arrives. I almost smiled. I took the empty chair beside Mira and said to the host, since truth is apparently being catered tonight, perhaps we should stop ordering only from the men's menu.
Owen's youngest associate nearly
choked on a laugh in the third row. The host tried to object, but the audience, already hungry for escalation, began applauding. Spectacle is democracy's drunk cussin'. Once it starts cheering, decorum can only watch itself die. I did not attack Celine.
That mattered.
Instead, I asked whether she had known before the dressing room ambush that Cassian had been asking Mira to wait until after his engagement negotiations stabilized. Celine's face barely changed, yet something inside the room shifted. Cassian interrupted, calling the question inappropriate. I asked whether inappropriate now meant verifiable. The host cut in, appealing for calm. Mira touched the bracelet under her sleeve, a tiny motion. Our agreed signal. I triggered the first mirror feed. Behind us, the decorative backdrop. Screens flickered. For a second, the audience saw only static. Then Cassian's voice filled the hall, unmistakable, intimate, unguarded. You know Celine is politics. Mira, you are the one I mean when I say future. His own face on the giant screens went white. The recording continued. Please, just come downstairs. I have been outside. You're building for an hour. You know I do not beg unless it is real. Around us, silence arrived like a dropped curtain. Public disgrace has a temperature. I felt it change the air. Celine stared at the screens, not at Mira now, but at Cassian, as if seeing the exact weight of him for the first time. The host began to rise, likely to stop the feed, but Owen's people were faster. One calm hand on one headset, one file folder produced at exactly the correct angle, and suddenly procedural caution became everyone's favorite value. I played the second file. This one was from the manager Cassian's team had inserted into Mira's orbit. It contained schedule changes, deliberate staff, rerouting, and a message that read, Celine needs an image she can survive. We need Mira exposed, but
not sympathetic.
Keep the camera wide for the first 3 seconds. Someone in the audience swore aloud. Myra did not look at me. She looked straight ahead with her chin slightly lifted, the way she did before delivering the final line of a scene that would either save the play or bury it. Cassian recovered the way arrogant men often do, by mistaking acceleration for
control.
He stood, pointed at me, and accused me of engineering the entire public humiliation because I had always resented him. The meridian system sang inside the bracelets like a fever.
Yes, it hissed. Yes, there she is, the jealous scholar, the
ugly mind, the sister who could not bear beauty being chosen over brilliance.
It
pushed pain through my temples, urging me toward rage theatrical enough to satisfy its oldest fantasies. Instead, I asked Cassian whether he truly wished to discuss resentment on a live feed while the metadata logs, payment records, and deleted message recoveries were still being uploaded in sequence.
He faltered.
Not because he suddenly found conscience, but because he finally heard the machinery turning against him. Systems of class and gender teach boys like Cassian that consequences negotiable. They become cowards. The instant consequence learns arithmetic. Celine surprised me next. She removed her microphone with careful fingers and said, very clearly, no one used my name to butcher another woman, and then called it protection for me. She turned toward Mira. I was cruel to you because I thought Cruelty was strength in the only language men like him ever reward. I was wrong.
It
Was not absolution. It was better than that. Accuracy purchased too late, but still. Paid in full, Cassian swore at her. The audience gasped as if profanity, rather than betrayal, had just crossed the line. The host finally abandoned the script. Cameras kept rolling because chaos rates well. I activated the second stage of the trap. Both bracelets warmed against our wrists. The mirrored screens switched again. This time not to audio but to something stranger. A lattice of luminous blue curves, overlaying the stage architecture like the skeleton of a geometric storm. The Meridian system thrashed at once. What have you done? It screamed. No longer. Bothering to pretend serenity, I answered aloud so everyone in the hall could hear me, and because after years of private harassment I wanted the thing forced into public grammar. I have spent 4 years studying hostile signal intrusion, narrative coercion, and cognitive hijacking, I said. Something has been trying to reduce women around this stage to stock roles for a very long time. It rewards rivalry. It punishes refusal.
It
monetizes humiliation. The audience thought at first that this was metaphor.
Then
The lights began to pulse out of sequence with the control board. Then the hidden earpieces on 2 technicians shrieked with the same clipped synthetic voice Mira and I had heard for years. Non-compliant hosts. Reassert romantic hierarchy. Restore
male-centered closure.
People stood. Some laughed in disbelief. Some crossed themselves. Cassian looked around wildly, for once too ignorant to decide whether he should lie, kneel, or run. Mira reached for my hand. It was time to finish. The Meridian system had always been invisible because it depended on interpretation. It lived best in the gap between what happened and what people were encouraged to believe had happened. My lattice narrowed that gap. It could not force the entire audience to understand us, but it could pull the system's command structure out far. Enough for its intentions to become observable. The blue geometry tightened around Myra and me, reading our pulse variants, matching the old interface signatures I had. Spent years mapping in desert silence. The system struck first. Pain tore through my spine, bright and drilling. Myra cried out beside me. On the main screen's text began appearing in brutal flashes no technician had typed. Ugly sister envy. Beautiful sister submit. Man selects.
Woman compete.
The audience stopped pretending. This was an ordinary scandal. Even fear looked better on them than voyeurism had. I nearly dropped to one knee. The system drove a spike of static behind my eyes and whispered that I could still win. It offered me what it thought had become tempting. After all these years, an easy public resurrection, the admiration reserved for misunderstood women once they become tragic enough, even a version of Cassian on his knees confessing he had chosen the wrong sister. I laughed at it through clenched teeth. You still think the worst thing that could happen to me is being unwanted by
A man, I said.
The words came out ragged, but they landed. Mira, pale and sweating, managed a furious smile. That is because it has the emotional range of a landlord's moldy wall, she said. Laughter broke across the hall in shocked little bursts. Good! Derision weakens tyrants better than awe. The system hated mockery because mockery refused to grant its script the dignity of fate. It pivoted to Mira. Choose him, it urged. Choose safety. Choose legitimacy. Choose marriage, endorsement contracts, polished interviews, legal wives' jewelry, and the right kind of magazine cover. It painted these things with the desperate detail of a machine built by people who believed female ambition could always be redirected to word ornament. Myra closed her eyes and answered in the voice she used when cutting through a bad director's notes. I choose work I can respect in the morning. I choose sleep without begging. I choose a life where no man tells me I must thank him for handing back my own name. The lattice brightened. Her rejection fed it more cleanly than my calculations had predicted. That made sense once I understood it. Systems such as this do not fear female pain most. They fear female criteria. A woman who knows what she values becomes difficult to program. A woman who says it aloud becomes contagious. The command text on the screens changed. New lines appeared, garbled, then sharper.
Terminate dual host loop.
Force attrition.
Sacrifice, secondary. The secondary I knew was me. The brilliant one. The woman the script could most easily convert into punishment because centuries of storytelling had already stocked the shelves for that role. If I turned bitter enough, the system would still salvage its ending. I saw the shape of its last gamble and understood what I had to do. Myra, I said all the points.
Now.
Her eyes flew open. Are you sure? She asked. Not aloud, but in the tiny childhood code we still use with finger pressure, pulse taps, gaze angles. Yes. Not to me. To the cage. She nodded once. Then together, voluntarily, without competition, without theft, without winner or loser, we dumped everything the Meridian system had ever bribed, punished, or tempted us into acquiring straight into the resonant loop. The effect was immediate and violent. Beauty, memory acceleration, inference gains, charisma boosts. All of it became raw charge inside the lattice. For one, terrifying. Second, I thought I had simply built a prettier bomb. Then, the blue curves folded, inward weaving themselves around a point in space, just above our joined hands. Something pulled. The air warped. The audience screamed. And there, dragged half into sight like a parasite ripped from dark water, was the nearest thing the Meridian system had ever had to a body, a dense knot of pale lines, spinning. Prompts and faceted light no larger than a child's heart, and infinitely uglier. It spoke in overlapping human tones now, stolen from us, from teachers, from hosts, perhaps long dead. Keep the prettier one, kill the clever one, reward the faithful, shame the difficult. Mother dead, father dead. Good grief for suitable girls. That last sentence froze my blood colder than any pain, so it had touched our parents after all. Not necessarily by steering a wheel or breaking a brake line with mechanical hands, but by leaning on the probabilities around them until grief became the corridor through which it could enter our lives. Myra heard it too. Her whole face changed. She did not cry. She looked at the thing, the way a wildfire might look at dry grass.
You were there, she said.
Our mother's blue scarf flashed through my memory. Our father singing terribly while chopping garlic. The ordinary tenderness of two people who should have had decades more than
They got.
Fury gave me steadier hands. I adjusted the final parameter on the bracelet with my thumb. The system tried to flee into the stage feed, then into the nearest phones, then through the technicians' headsets. The lattice held. I had built it to buffer hostile signals. I had not until that moment fully trusted it to imprison grief with teeth. I do now. The final compression required synchronization. My old lab model had predicted that the system could only be fully isolated if both hosts rejected its core premise at exactly the same threshold of cognitive stress. In plainer terms, Mira and I had to tell the truth while it hurt enough to matter. So we did. I said, I will not build my life out of another woman's loss. Myra said, I will not call domination love just because the flowers are expensive. I said, I'm not a villain because I refuse reduction. Myra said, I'm not a prize because I'm beautiful. I said, my sister is not my competition. Myra said, my sister is not my cautionary tale. The lattice flashed white, every screen in the theater filled with one impossible image, the system collapsing inward, its borrowed voices nodding, shredding, and finally narrowing to a single point of furious light no bigger than a bead. Then the bracelet on my wrist sealed with a sound like a lock choosing its own door. Afterward, the hall smelled like hot metal, expensive perfume, and fear. Medical teams checked everyone. The broadcast, of course, had already escaped into the world. You cannot put a ghost back in a luxury box once 3 million people have watched it spit instructions about female obedience across a live feed. Some viewers insisted the display had been hacked performance art. Some called it a mass psychosis event. Some focused only on the scandal documents and ignored the impossible thing entirely because patriarchy is often more comprehensible to the public than genuine anomaly. I did not care. Owen took custody of the recordings, the financial trails, the schedule manipulations, and enough corroborating testimony to keep 3 firms busy for years. Cassian's family began damage control before the ambulances had finished loading. Celine issued a statement the next day that named coercion without naming herself heroic. I respected that. Survival is not improved by polished wording, but wording can still matter. The hardest part came quietly. Once the system was caged, the gifts it had layered onto us did not disappear all at once, but they did begin to normalize. Mira's face remained beautiful because it had always been beautiful, though the strange almost liquid magnetism the system had sharpened for screens faded. She grieved that loss for 1 hour, maybe 2, then laughed and said, good, now if people stare at me it will at least be for reasons that belong partly to lighting and partly to God.
My
Own mind slowed too, not into stupidity, never that, but into something recognizably
human.
I could no longer hold 6 branching proofs in consciousness while answering and email and listening to a train announcement. To my surprise, I did not feel diminished. I felt tired, yes, and sometimes angry at the years spent in a bargain I had not chosen, but I also felt free in a way genius purchased through extortion had never allowed. Freedom has a tempo. It does not always rush. The public aftermath was not clean because public memory never is. Myra did not wake the next morning to universal sympathy and restored contracts. Real life is meaner than that. Some brands fled. Some producers decided she had become high risk. Anonymous forums still called her calculating, immoral, unstable, too ambitious, not ambitious enough, and every other contradiction women are assigned when the mob wants all exits sealed. But this time she had evidence, legal muscle, and most important, her own voice intact. She released nothing impulsively. She let Owen's team file where filing mattered. She took one carefully chosen interview in which she did not cry, did not flatter, and did not perform forgiveness for the sake of viewers who confuse softness with truth. I sat behind the camera as she said with perfect calm that women are not side effects in the private growth arcs of wealthy men. That line traveled farther than any slur had. Cassian Rourke did not collapse romantically enough to satisfy internet bloodlust, which made his downfall more useful. He survived. Men like him usually do, but survival came stripped of glamour. Internal family emails surfaced showing how long his engagement to Celine had been treated as a commercial consolidation tool. Payment records connected his team to the ambush broadcast. Several advertisers backed away from his new ventures. More interesting to me, though, was the personal unraveling. Without the system stroking his entitlement from some hidden layer, he seemed suddenly unable to inhabit his own legend. Progress made him restless. Repentance made him theatrical. He attempted apology through flowers again.
Owen.
Returned them unopened. He attempted explanation in a handwritten letter to Mira. She archived it under materials for future litigation. He attempted to call me arrogant in one interview and accidentally admitted he had always found my refusal more humiliating than any public joke. That at least was honest. Myra rebuilt from smaller rooms outward. Instead of scrambling for major productions, she returned to the stage where cameras could not edit consent after. The fact and craft still had a chance against algorithms. The first play she produced independently sold badly for a week and then sold out for 3 months once. People realized she had become sharper, stranger, and vastly more interesting since public disgrace stopped requiring her to look harmless. She founded a tiny Performance studio for girls who had been told they were only faces, only bodies. Only supporting decoration for someone else's genius or sorrow. On the wall of the main rehearsal room, she painted a sentence in red. No one gets to call your labor a miracle after ignoring the work. Her students adored her, feared disappointing her, and copied her habit of doing stretches while reading contract clauses. That last improvement alone may justify the continued existence of civilization. As for me, I accepted a position leading an ethics and interference laboratory, whose official purpose was to study manipulative signal structures in civilian and defense
contexts.
Unofficially, I was designing a vocabulary for forms of coercion most institutions still preferred to dismiss as metaphor. The sealed bead of light, containing the meridian system, remained in a triple shielded chamber for months, before I allowed myself to stand before it again. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it muttered fragments in voices I recognized. It never again sounded like destiny. Under observation, stripped of leverage, it was small, repetitive, and embarrassingly dependent on stolen hierarchies. I came to think of it not as an all-powerful parasite, but as a machine built from humanity's oldest lazy stories. Women should compete, men should choose, beauty should serve, brilliance should soften, and pain should be hidden until it can be sold. Put that way, it became easier to hate and easier to outbuild. On the first anniversary of the broadcast, Mira and I visited our parents' graves. Together, spring had reached the cemetery in a shy way, with green pushing up along the edges of stone as if even morning had to negotiate with biology. We brought wild lilies for our mother and garlic flowers for our father because he had once claimed the smell of garlic was more honest than perfume. We told them everything, or as much as dead people can reasonably be expected to absorb about
Parasitic.
narrative engines, corrupt airs, and the logistics of live televised implosion.
At
Some point, Mira sat cross-legged on the grass and asked whether I ever resented the years the system shaped. I considered the question carefully. I resented the theft, I said. I did not resent us. She leaned her head on my shoulder.
Good, she said.
I do not resent us either. That felt like the only verdict worth carrying home. Myra and I still meet for breakfast every Sunday when schedules allow. She arrives, smelling faintly of stage dust and expensive shampoo, tosses her sunglasses onto the table, steals fruit from my plate, and accuses me of dressing like a widow who manages satellites. I tell her she looks like a knife disguised as a rose.
we
Compare notes on students, lawsuits, scripts, grant proposals, and the latest ridiculous men attempting to explain women to themselves in long public threads.
then
Before we leave, we perform the same small ritual we invented at 17 in the kitchen where the system first failed to split us. We put our wrists together, as if invisible bracelets still link them, and ask the question that saved us. Twice, same side, always, one of us answers. Always, the other confirms. The world can keep its crowns. We learned long ago that a finish line reached together looks better than any throne.